6. Misbelief in anxiety. Susie is stacking dishes in the dishwasher for her mother when she accidentally drops a glass and breaks it. Her heart pounds. She knows this means punishment. When she broke things in the past, her mother usually did 3 things: yell, call Susie names, and spank. Susie shudders in fear, thinking of what is to come. Then Mother enters the kitchen. When she sees the broken glass, she seizes Susie by the arm, raves about the glass being fine crystal, calls her clumsy, careless, and useless, and then wallops her. The next day, Mother again tells Susie to stack dishes in the dishwasher. Susie isn't very eager to do it. She tries to come up with an excuse to get out of the task. She says she has to go to the toilet, or she has a stomachache and has to go to bed. Susie feels anxious because she has been conditioned to feel that way. If she stacks the dishes, there's the danger of breaking something. And if she breaks something, she will surely get yelled at, called names, and spanked, and that would be painful. In time, if Susie has enough of these painful experiences, that is, breaks enough glasses and receives enough insults and spankings, she will develop anxiety that spreads into her very feelings of self-worth. Pair these events with Susie's social contacts. She goes roller skating and has trouble staying upright on the skates. The other children ridicule and tease her. In school and at home, her brother calls her names in front of other people. Her father often calls her lazy, and her mother yells when she doesn't perform according to her expectations. Susie teaches herself how to be anxious. When her playmates ridicule her, she feels pain. Therefore, she feels anxious when she sees them playing on the ice skating rink or playground, as well as when she thinks about them. Her family's demands, which she cannot always meet, present additional anxious feelings. So Susie does something typical of anxiety neurotics. She begins to avoid the things that make her feel anxious. She begins to avoid contacts with her playmates. She avoids her family, stays by herself. She teaches herself that when she withdraws from situations that make her feel anxious, the anxiety level drops. This is reinforcing to her. Carol is a 22-year-old person. She has spent several years of her life piling up anxiety responses, just as Susie is doing now. She is riddled with fears and can't force herself to go out and get a job. She says she wants to get a job, but she just can't get one. She has her own apartment near her parents' home, which she rarely leaves. If you could get out and get a job, you'd pull yourself out of the dumps you're in, her mother tells her over the telephone. I can't get a job, she protests. I've tried, and I just can't. In desperation, her parents insist she see a psychologist. I hate job interviews, she tells her therapist. They scare me. Why is that? Well, they're awful, that's why. The job market is tight, and there are so few openings. By her 8th session, she is able to identify her thoughts and beliefs. She identifies her feared objects as other people. Her inability to land a job is not due to the job market, but due to the anxiety she suffers at the thought of going out and being with people. She fears what the people could do to her. Carol, you said you hated being in crowds. That's right, I really hate it. What could a crowd do to you? Well, they might make fun of me or laugh at me. Would that be terrible? Yes, it would be terrible. It would be horrible. I'd hate that. Would it really be the end of the world for you if someone laughed or made fun of you? Well, I'd hate it, but I guess it actually wouldn't be the end of the world. Carol didn't realize it, but she had just made a big and important step of progress. 1. She listened to herself and heard what was really going on in her mind. 2. By listening, she realized she had been telling herself that to be laughed at and made fun of would be terrible, horrible. Misbelief. 3. She then argued that misbelief with the truth by telling herself that although she wouldn't like the situation, it would not be the end of the world. People who suffer from anxiety tell themselves, if the thing I worry about actually happened, it would wipe me out. It would be awful, horrible. Dr. Albert Ellis, director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Rational Psychotherapy, calls this awfulizing. Anxious people do a lot of it. Little Susie does it when she avoids her playmates. It would be awful if they were mean to me. Carol does it by avoiding job interviews. It would be awful if I didn't do well. Carol will realize that the idea of being in a crowd makes her anxious, not because of the number of people or discomfort brought by the press of a lot of people, but because she fears they might make fun of her or laugh at her. She will overcome this lie as she de-awfulizes the thought in her mind and replaces it with the truth. Some common lies are, he, she, they might not like me. That would be terrible. I might not meet people's expectations of me. That would be terrible. I might be rejected. That would be terrible. I might fail. That would be terrible. I might say or do something dumb. That would be terrible. Once I've gained happiness, I might lose it. That would be terrible. Once I've gained love, I might lose it. That would be terrible. I might not look as good as other people. That would be terrible. He, she, they might not approve of me. That would be terrible. He, she, they might discover what a nothing I really am. That would be terrible. Nobody will ever love me. That would be terrible. I might be a terrible lover. That would be terrible. I might get hurt. That would be terrible. I might be asked to do something I don't know how to do. That would be terrible. I might lose everything I've got. That would be terrible. I could die. That would be terrible. There are many more. How many of them can you recognize? What other people think of me. The central theme running through the misbeliefs and anxiety is that what other people think about me is of such crucial importance that I must anticipate it in advance of all my actions. I must do all I can in order to prevent others from thinking badly of me. If they think badly of me, it will be a mortal blow to me. It would be terrible. Nearly all anxious people believe and tell themselves that they are in danger of other people's reactions to them. These words, like all misbeliefs, are lies from the enemy. While we are certainly glad if others think well of us and love us, we can still live very well if we don't have the affection and approval of other people. The scriptures teach us to consider others in verses such as, "Love your neighbor as yourself," and, "Beloved, let us love one another." But that does not mean we are to strive and aim for the approval of everybody and drop dead if we don't receive it. It's great to be liked. It is, in fact, more desirable to be liked than disliked. There is nothing wrong with learning how to be liked and appreciated by others. There are skills of personal communication which are beneficial to learn. But it is silly and destructive to believe that you must succeed in making everyone endorse you and everything about you. There is no reason why you cannot learn techniques for pleasing, influencing, persuading, and changing the behavior of other people. But this is different from dwelling on such misbeliefs as, "I must be important to someone." It's nice to be important to someone, but it's healthy to leave out the must. The philosophy that says you should be liked and appreciated by one and all is not only silly, it's non-biblical. If you are learning techniques to please, influence, persuade, and manipulate people, what are your motives? Are you saying to yourself, "I must be important to someone, I must be liked, I must be accepted, I must be"? Let's assume your musts aren't fulfilled after all. Suppose people still don't particularly like you after you work diligently to gain their approval. Suppose someone actually hates the sight of you, outwardly rejects you. Suppose someone you respect and desire the approval of tells you to go fly a kite or jump in the lake or some similar brush-off. What do you tell yourself then? Because placed as paramount in your gallery of musts is the notion that everybody should approve of and like you, you'll probably respond to rejection with such miseries as, "I'm really a loser," or "What a failure I am," or "I'm a real nothing," or "I'll get them for this, I'll show the world, I don't need anybody." The Bible does not teach us to please everybody on earth. It does not tell us to work overtime trying to get people to love us. Jesus never told us to go out and take a course on how to get people to like us. He told us to love Him, trust Him, have faith in Him, glorify Him, and to genuinely care about others. The price an anxious person pays to please people is too great. Jesus, above all others, demonstrated that if a person is really serious about pleasing God, there will be times when his behavior will be just the opposite of what others expect of him. Jesus himself wasn't loved by everyone, and still isn't. Jesus wasn't accepted by everyone when he lived, and he still isn't. Many have found fault with him. When he was alive on earth, he made the leaders and molders of public opinion quite upset with his social behavior. He befriended prostitutes and thieves, and sought the company of traitorous tax gatherers. This did not make him Mr. Popular with the religious folk. In fact, many of the things he did didn't win him friends. People found fault with the way he talked and worshipped. They didn't like what he said, didn't like his friends, didn't like what he did. They even criticized the way he ate. But he wasn't devastated by what others thought of him, because he kept his eye on the Father and doing his will. In fact, he had joy through it all, and says to us, "My joy I give to you." Jesus didn't live to please people. He lived to please his Father in heaven. Nobody other than you has the power to make you miserable. That power is yours alone. You make yourself miserable by the things you tell yourself. Sometimes, however, an anxious person cannot define what it is that is making him anxious. The term anxiety covers a large number of behaviors, including cognitive activity, such as worrying, fretting, obsessing, as well as physiological events appropriate under stress, dry mouth, perspiring, rapid heartbeat and respiration, dizziness, lightheadedness, tremors, butterflies in the stomach, tense muscles. Anxiety is ordinarily defined as fear in the absence of actual danger. The event a person fears is highly unlikely to do to him what he fears. Anxiety is 1. Fear in the absence of real danger. 2. Overestimation of the probability of danger and exaggeration of its degree of terribleness. 3. Imagined negative results. The acrophobic person has a fear of heights and is afraid he will fall from the highest floor of a tall building to his death, even though he is indoors with the windows closed or standing on a heavily screened observation platform. He grossly overestimates the likelihood of falling. Granted, it certainly wouldn't be a pleasant event if a person were to trip off the edge of a high building and plunge 20 floors to the pavement below, but the likelihood of its actually happening is extremely remote. In spite of that, the acrophobic person is horrified that such a thing might happen to him. His life can be made miserable because of his fear of heights. Driving along a mountain road may be a living nightmare to him. He may get hysterical if he has to climb a ladder or scale a catwalk. Just the thought of a high plane can bring a cold sweat to his brow. He is trapped by this fear, in spite of the fact that he is actually in no danger at all. The zoophobic person is another person with exaggerated fear. His anxiety, due to imagery, is related to animals, and he is deathly afraid of them. He may turn pale and tremble in the presence of a tiny kitten. What he is doing is exaggerating the degree of evil he would suffer if the kitten were to jump on him and bite or scratch. He may imagine being clawed to death, disemboweled, or being suffocated by it. In reality, he is in very little danger at all. The zoophobic realizes that most domestic pets are not dangerous, but he is tormented by images of danger. The claustrophobic person is afraid of small places. Elevators, small rooms without windows, crowded narrow hallways, and other enclosed areas will be an agonizing torture for this person. He is afraid that if the building were to catch fire, or if some disaster were to occur, he couldn't get out fast enough. He overstresses the likelihood of these improbable events happening. He is tormented by this fear. Another person who experiences agonizing anxiety is the agoraphobic person who is fearful of open places. He is afraid that if he goes to these places, he will have an anxiety attack at being there and be unable to escape. He tells himself he will become so anxious in such places that his heart will race, his breath will come in gulps, his limbs will tremble, his head will swirl. He'll black out and lay squirming on the ground, making a public spectacle of himself. Maybe he'll die, or maybe he'll get carted away to some hospital where he'll be pronounced hopelessly insane. How probable is such an event? Little Susie, at the beginning of this chapter, has become an agoraphobic. She sits in the big leather chair of the consulting room, her eyes darting back and forth at the furnishings and out the window. Susie, is it true you haven't been to school for several days? I guess so. I'm never going back. Never? Never. I hate it. It's too big. My other school wasn't so big. Did you like your other school better? No, I hated that school too. I don't want to be around so many people. They make me nervous. What happens when you become nervous? I don't know. I just get sick, I guess. I feel sick. Where do you feel sick? Everywhere. I just feel sick. I feel like I'm going to faint or lose control. Like I'll lose control. What do you mean by that, Susie? I'll just lose control, you know? Like start screaming or crying. Or maybe I'll fall down or something and lose control. Little Susie, whose parents can't understand how they could possibly have such a disturbed child, wonder if she is brain damaged. There is nothing wrong with Susie's brain, however. She is a bright child who suffers anxiety at phobic proportions. At first, she doesn't want to receive psychological help, but after a few sessions, she begins to respond, and she likes her therapist. Susie, what would happen if you actually did lose control, as you say, in the middle of a crowd? Her eyes widen, and the pulse beat at her temples quickens. Oh, I would lose control. I don't know, maybe go crazy. Do you really think you would go crazy? Do you think I would? No, I don't. She is quiet for a moment. She is fumbling with her hands. I don't know. I'd lose control in front of all those people. In front of the other kids. It would be the worst. The worst. Would it really? What would be so bad about that? She wants to laugh, but she just groans. Oh, that would be so terrible. Several sessions later, she is able to honestly say to her therapist, I suppose it wouldn't be the end of the world if I lost control. And do you really believe you will lose control? Well, I don't know. After all, we did go to school twice last week, and I didn't lose control. I went this morning. Is it unpleasant to be around all those kids? Yes, it's unpleasant. It's endurable, though, isn't it? I mean, a thing can be unpleasant and still endurable, can't it, Susie? Susie smiles her brightest smile since she has been coming for therapy. She shrugs then and says, I suppose. I just never thought that something could be unpleasant and that I could still get through it. Are you willing to go to school again tomorrow? I think so. The terrible consequences Susie imagined were based on nothing but anxiety. Some people's lives are organized around the effort to avoid anxiety. The fear of fear consumes their waking hours, and anxiety about anxiety brings such tension and stress that it becomes self-fulfilling. The agoraphobic cries like Job, the thing which I greatly feared has come upon me. The misbelief is exaggeration of the badness of the anxiety attack. For even though it may be truly uncomfortable, it is not likely to do a person any harm. We don't want to make the answers to Susie's problem sound simplistic, and we don't want you to get the idea that phobias are cured miraculously after a few little talks with a Christian psychotherapist. Susie has come a long way, though, and is on her way to true recovery. She is beginning to understand and act on the truth. She is learning how to argue against her misbeliefs. Her parents' unrealistic expectations of her, rejection from her brother and friends, as well as failure at sports and schoolwork, all contribute to her anxiety responses. The wonderful fact is, however, she will not have to wait until she is an adult to learn the skills that make for a healed and normal life. She is learning them now with God's help. The love of God reaches into Susie's fears. This love surrounds, engulfs, and pierces into her soul, where her emotions and thoughts live. She imagines the Lord accompanying her to school. She sees him standing beside her in the school gym, softly whispering, I'm with you always, Susie. She chooses to replace some of the self-condemning lies she has believed with such truths as, the same spirit that raised Christ from the dead dwells in me. Gradually and slowly, Susie will take part in the youth group at church, and she will be a sparkling star for the Lord, whom she is finding to be very real. Perhaps Susie has suffered more than most little girls in the 6th grade, but she has learned something many adults are still groping to discover. Even though things may be unpleasant, I can live through it without falling apart, and things are only as unpleasant as I tell myself they are. Let's look at the major misbeliefs in anxiety. 1. If the thing I worry about were to happen, it would be terrible. 2. Even though the likelihood of the terrible happening to me is utterly remote, I believe it's actually inevitable. Most of our anxieties do not reach phobic proportions. You may feel tense and anxious when you have to get up and give a speech, or when you are in a new and unfamiliar situation that demands your best. But more than likely, your reactions won't reach phobic proportions. You may think your legs are turning to putty, and your stomach is popping with flying objects, but you do eventually recover. An actor tells himself on opening night of his play that he will surely have a heart attack before the curtain goes up. He perspires, his hands are cold, his feet feel numb. He has difficulty breathing. I'll never live through it, he tells the floor. I don't remember a word of the script. I'm sick all over. 2.5 hours later, when the curtain rings down, he feels great. Why? He got through it. He shows us one of the best cures for situational anxiety. Avoid it, and you'll increase the anxiety. Face it and go through the anxiety, and you'll remove it. It may be unpleasant, but whoever told us all of life was supposed to be pleasant? The actor somehow pushed one foot in front of the other and got himself out on stage at his cue. From then on, he was okay. He got through it, and on top of it, got through it well. Whether or not the play was a critical success is not important. What is important here is that he plunged through his anxiety and didn't turn back. When you are feeling anxiety, stop and ask yourself, 1. What am I telling myself is terrible? The actor tells himself he'll forget his lines. He'll do a bad job in the play. He thinks that's terrible. 2. Will the results really be as terrible as I tell myself they'll be? The actor says terrible things will happen if he forgets his lines or does a bad job. Now argue the case, like this. 1. It's not terrible. It may be unpleasant, but that's a long way from terrible. Some of the things that I believe to be absolutely terrible really are only annoying. 2. Even if what I fear were to happen, it wouldn't be terrible. It might be unpleasant, but it surely wouldn't be the end of the world or me. If the worst happened, the consequences wouldn't really be as bad as I've been telling myself. Avoidance behavior. The actor could have refused to go on stage the night his play opened. He could have chosen to run away from the unpleasant feelings he was experiencing. But he didn't. He forged ahead, plowed through his anxieties, and afterward, he felt good. Many situations in your life may be less than pleasant. In fact, oftentimes you'll be faced with problems that seem to be insurmountable. Avoiding the problem or situation usually makes it more intense. Avoiding anxiety is not the way to get rid of it. Tell yourself, 1. Even though I'd like to avoid the circumstance or situation, I will not. Avoidance behavior will only increase my anxiety. I will go ahead, experience the unpleasant feelings, and I'll get through it. 2. I do not have to be afraid of unpleasant feelings. They are a part of life, and they won't kill me. It's acceptable to have unpleasant feelings at times. Margaret is a beautiful woman of 40 with the energies of a teenager. She busies herself caring for the needs of her family, as well as working a full-time job outside the home. She has several hobbies and is active in her church as a prayer group leader and Sunday school teacher. She is well loved by those closest to her and has many friends and acquaintances. She has one problem. She is deathly afraid to drive a car and refuses to learn how. This problem was magnified when her husband decided it was time to move to a larger home in the suburbs. Margaret would no longer have the convenience of the city buses to help hide her fear of driving. She would no longer have the familiar busy routine with which she felt safe and secure. She was faced with the threat she dreaded most, sitting behind the driver's wheel and driving a car on dangerous streets and highways. The thought was horrible. It nearly cost her her marriage. I won't move, she told her husband flatly. But we'll move into a bigger and better home, he tried to reason. We'll have everything you could want. I'm not going. But why not? What's wrong? I hate the suburbs. Her husband could not understand her attitude. He attempted a rational discussion. But you've always said how much nicer it would be to live in the suburbs. The children would have more outdoor freedom. We'd have a more modern home with more space, and it would be more quiet than the city. I don't want to talk about it. If you want to move, go ahead. You move without me, though. I don't want to move without you. That's a foolish thing to say. If you really loved me, you wouldn't do this to me. Do what to you? Her husband was unaware of the proportions to which Margaret's anxieties had grown. She had been able to develop her fears without revealing how painful they were. Her lies were, if I drive a car, I'll have an accident, and that would be terrible. I could kill someone, or I could be killed. Margaret and her husband sought professional marriage counseling, and the truth emerged. Margaret's fear of driving was deeper than they realized. Very gradually, and over a long period of time, Margaret was able to overcome this fear. Eventually, she was able to take driving lessons and even own her own car. She was able to get through her unpleasant feelings. She could do the things she dreaded. But how does Margaret or anyone else experiencing intense anxiety get to the point where their fears pass? The answer is to listen to the words you tell yourself, argue against those words, and replace the misbelief with the truth. In a very short time, Margaret was able to see her misbeliefs clearly. They were, driving cars is the most dangerous thing a person can do. I might do something stupid or make a mistake, costing a life. That would be the most terrible thing I can think of. She then taught herself to challenge such nonsense. Driving cars is not the most dangerous thing a person can do. Living without Jesus is more dangerous. Furthermore, if I make a mistake, I will handle the consequences. She learned to speak the truth to herself. Even though it is anxiety-arousing for me to get behind the wheel of a car, I can do it. Gradually, she progressed from sitting behind the wheel to starting the engine. I can do it. In Christ, nothing is impossible. Then, with someone sitting beside her in the front seat, she would put the car into drive, step gently on the gas, and drive only to the end of the driveway. Then she would brake, put the car in park, and turn off the engine. I did it! I drove the car! I got through it! Thank you, Lord! The next day, she repeated driving to the end of the driveway. She did this for 3 days. We asked her how she felt driving to the end of the driveway for the 4th time. I felt fine. No anxiety? No, not really. I felt fine about it. Why do you think you felt fine about it? Well, I knew I could do it. I had done it 3 times before, and it didn't do me in. I guess I just felt confident it wasn't going to be that terrible. We were delighted and congratulated her. Then we asked, "Are you ready to drive to the corner?" Margaret made the drive to the corner. She did it several times with someone with her, and then she soloed. I did it, she exclaimed. I never dreamed it would be possible. Most anxieties are related to 4 things. 1. Dread of making public mistakes. 2. Fear of making someone else angry or upset. 3. Losing love. 4. Physical pain and death. These fears are exaggerated and often needless. In reality, you create anxiety, not situations or events. Anxiety is brought about by telling yourself something is terrible. What does terrible mean? Usually it means something far worse than you think you can endure. You tell yourself that terrible is beyond human endurance, worse than anything on earth. Truly, nothing of this sort exists. Terrible is something that you firmly believe ought not to be. It's terrible, therefore it must not exist. This, too, is a misbelief. Inconvenient, annoying, unfortunate, unpleasant stimuli will always exist. You, however, control your own feelings. Thinking creates feelings. You'll never get rid of every unpleasantry around you, but you can gain the skills to handle them effectively. The mistaken belief that life should be sweetsy, nicey, and without problems will make you quite miserable. With these ideas in your mind, you will seek to avoid or run from trouble rather than overcome it. Jesus tells us quite clearly that we will encounter negatives in this world, and that there will be problems, trials, and temptations of all sorts. He said, "In the world you shall have tribulation." He warned us of a devil, the enemy of God who seeks to destroy man. But then he said triumphantly, "But be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." We can be free of crippling anxiety when we rest in this beautiful fact. In Christ, we are safe, loved, protected, watched over, and one day bound for eternal glory. Getting rid of your anxiety means to 1. Minimize the danger you tell yourself you're in. Remember, your fears are exaggerated. 2. Realize you create your anxiety. You create your own misbeliefs. 3. Dispute these misbeliefs. Challenge them. Is this really as terrible as I'm telling myself? 4. Replace the misbeliefs with the truth. Don't worry about how weak you think you are. Jesus said, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." Here are some words of truth with which to argue those lies. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Luke chapter 10, verse 19. And I say unto you, ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Luke chapter 11, verse 9. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. James chapter 4, verse 7. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. Let's pray together. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. And now let's expect great things as he answers our prayer. Anxiety will no longer have controlling power over you.